Dave Scott, back with Justin from Elevation Homes. Tip number 7, and we've been doing a lot of these shows on waterproofing, water damage, and this week we're going to touch on molds because that's kind of what everything leads to, that dampness, the water. And Justin, first question for you today is there any way to detect if there's mold in your house? How do you guys find out?
I mean, well, typically the original complaint is musty smell, or they feel like they need to run a dehumidifier constantly, or so on and so forth. I mean, there's a number of ways to detect it. I mean, we have moisture meters and there is some mold detection equipment. I'm a little bit old school when it comes to that stuff. I like to just try to do the investigation basically visually, so that we can kind of determine, okay, where is it the strongest? What could potentially be feeding it? And then sometimes it's a good old fashioned hole in the wall. If it's a wall board, I mean, sometimes we have to access it through floor vents or things like this. I mean, anywhere where we can get a little opening or an insight into the cavity where it may be growing. I mean, and it may not even be hidden. I mean, in some cases it's pretty blatantly obvious. I mean, you just gotta, you gotta get in there and do a little bit of picking, and most of it, I mean, we've had it on undersides of beds, stuff to where you wouldn't think it's really it. And in some cases it's even better, because at least you can get rid of that bed.
Right. Yeah.
If it's just a musty smell because it's accumulating on a bed frame that, was maybe close to a water source, or the humidity was way too high in that room because of lack of ventilation, whatever it may be, whatever is the cause. Sometimes those individual pieces are nicer, because you can just, repair them or chuck them. And it's not actually a home problem.
Is it the most common room, the laundry room or the basement? Like, where do you guys find the most incidents of mold?
Yeah, I mean, you're typical. I mean, anywhere there's a tap, it's usually more prevalent, right? I mean, laundry rooms are big guys because it's just nonstop. I mean, you're feeding everything. You're feeding heat. You're feeding air, and then you've got all this water, and sometimes it's as simple as we take stuff out of the washer, we sit it on top, and it sits there for a little while, runs down the side, runs down, little bit of water runs down the side every few days, runs towards the drywall, and then next thing you know, behind that washer and dryer is just a sea of it, right?
And does it? So go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, and then I mean, the basements are the I mean, they're the major, and that goes on to the same thing we were talking about before. The previous show is that I mean that's, if you don't have a dry basement, I mean, you're asking for it, and it's got to be monitored, because I mean it'll get away from you in a hurry.
Now, with modern homes, there's the vapor barrier, I know, in between the walls. Does that help reduce it? Like, what a lot of the older homes, right? I'm sure when you guys do a lot of older home work, you must find you must go into homes and go, oh boy, we're going to be tearing out everything just to clear it out, right?
Yeah, no, and in some cases is that, like I said, there's all different gradients and severities of mold, and what's safe and what's not safe. I mean, some of it is really harmless. I mean, it's something that you can clean off yourself without too much of an issue. And some of it is, you definitely you want to get it remediated properly by a company when it's the thick black stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where you really want to make sure that in an older house that it's there's mixed opinions on this, but I mean, an older house should remain an older house to a certain extent, within terms of how much you try to seal that thing up.
Okay.
Right. So back in the day, we didn't have these air barriers, vapor barriers, moisture. There were some moisture control things, but generally speaking, it was the windows and the fact that the house was not completely sealed, so that, we actually didn't even have, in the early 1900s, we didn't even pack insulation around the window. There was gaps there. I mean, your casing is what sealed it up. And that allowed, those houses all the way up until like, the 50s, it allowed them to breathe. It allowed them to have their lungs and have their sort of, their capillaries and their veins all working, so that if stuff got wet, there was enough air movement coming through the soffits, coming through the windows, bleeding. It sounds very inefficient, but those houses didn't have issues because they breathe, right? I mean, as far as its inhabitants, wasn't always the most comfortable situation, but those houses were healthy houses. Up even to the 30s. I mean, they did their deal. They exhausted themselves. We remember, no bath fans, none of that stuff, right? And somehow all those old houses stayed up. Then, in the modern building age, and not that the modern building age is wrong, but these new building envelopes that we started in the late 60s and the 70s, and then now, come 1990s and above, I mean, it's gotten to the point where, I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but I mean, Ontario, not even Canada, but Ontario has some of the strictest building envelope procedures in the world. Like, I mean, nobody builds like we have to here. Just because, especially in Southern Ontario, we experience every kind of weather that there is. We don't have the prevalent hot, the prevalent cold, the wet, and anyways, we have it all. But my point is that, so now if you make a mistake on your weatherproofing when you're building a new house or when you're renovating it, now the house is in this limbo mode. It's like, okay, I'm breathing on the left wing, but the new right wing that's a brand new addition is absolutely sealed up rock solid. And then they fight each other. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen actual mold happen at the joint of an addition.
Interesting, eh?
Just because one area is breathing, one area is not breathing, and it's literally creating this little environment right at that joint for it all to happen. One side's hot, one side's cold. You know what I mean? So so we have a few little techniques that we do to try to alleviate that. Because I mean, to be honest with you, I'm doing 3 additions right now, all the way. The one house is a 1920. The second house is a 1960s. That's a little easier because I mean we can blend a bit better. But yeah, I mean it all slips back into the mold thing slips back into even actually the actual whole renovation process, because that's where you're going to start to prevent it.
Well, and that's where you're going to start to see it. I'm sure when you get in and start a renovation, right? If you find mold, it's going to add to the cost, and you don't know it's there. They don't know it's there, like you said. Yep. And then all of a sudden, boom, here's all this mold. What can people do? What would you recommend on a daily, monthly, weekly basis that you should do just to check for mold? Is there anything that you should be doing?
Well, I mean, you want to. I mean, you don't have to go nuts with it. You don't have to be, you don't have to be a building inspector to figure this stuff out. But I mean, all the major areas, where you kind of neglect, under the sink, it's not a bad idea to clean out under your sink like every. I know, everybody hates to do it, but I mean, pull all that stuff out, because I mean, especially with the liners, people put the liners in under the sink. The liners, if there's a one drip a month. And it doesn't have to be a leak. It can be a condensation drip, right? That comes off of your plumbing, which is, it
happens. Depending
on if you use a lot of hot or a lot of cold, a couple of drips, sit underneath those liners, and you end up with a little patch, like, a little fist-sized patch of dark mold, and you don't even know that those fuzzies are happening there. Same thing with, your laundry room. Like, you can look behind there. It's not going to freak you out, right? I mean, look behind the washer and dryer. It's, you want to make sure that all the plumbing is still intact. Make sure the dryer hose hasn't popped off. I mean, these things vibrate like hell, right? I mean, and if that dryer vent has popped off and it's not exhausting, you've now created another environment, because now you're feeding moist air right to a drywall surface. Generally. Yeah. I mean, there's usually a drywall surface right there.
The hole's cut.
And that behind the dryer is probably, I'm gonna say 40% of the time.
So you guys know where you're looking.
Yeah.
And you said earlier, what recommendations would you make? Let's say you did find, you were doing some home renovations and you found a big patch of black mold. Like, do you go right to the environmental people? Like, what's the protocol there?
Well, I mean, I usually, because I've seen it so many times, I'll usually I'll assess it. Okay, so if I've got one sheet of drywall that's affected but not gone anywhere else, what we'll usually do is we'll sandwich that drywall against a piece of wood, a piece of plastic, whatever, and we'll just cut that one out and be done with it. Like, but now if it's really, you got to know when to call it. So if it's start to spread on other walls, if for sure that the insulation's been compromised behind it, that's kind of when I'm like, okay, well let's get at least a test. We'll cut out a square, see what it's like. If it's something that's like a non-harmful, then we will, we can make the same thing. We can make the call like, oh, do we take it out as a crew as part of the demo? We'll just get masked up or whatever. Or is it, there's this, time to get an environmental company in and pull it in. I mean, to be honest with you, the right thing to do, if you question anything, is just, call one of these environmental companies and get them in right away. Cause I mean, they're even have further knowledge than we do, but on the grand scheme of things, I mean, I'm not going to bother or cost somebody money for a sheet of drywall. In my
does
opinion,
it usually form at the top and bottom of walls? Like, you don't really see a lot of mold in the middle, do you? It has to go somewhere.
Not generally. Not unless there's a water source that comes through that middle, right? But I mean, it's usually, if it's a roof issue, it's usually those top corners, right? And those ones are way more noticeable.
You can see them.
I mean, you usually catch them. And then, but same thing. It's more bottom wall creep that comes up, backs of showers, if they've been leaking for a while, the laundry room. I mean, showers are actually less prevalent, to be honest, because they really have to be, be in rough shape, and then it goes like hell. But I mean, most people, if it was before it got to that point, they'd be like, hey, I think we need to do something with the shower, right? But so that's why I say, but it's the ones that you kind of just that are easily bypassed, like the under the kitchen sink, the laundry room, the basements, that we can just walk past in our minds and physically, that it's easy to ignore. And when it's easy, the shower's not easy to ignore, because generally the shower, you're sitting in there and you're like, God almighty, like, what am I showering in? I mean, there's not much else going on in the shower. Well, I mean, there can be more going on in the shower, but generally there's not much going on in the shower. So, I mean, you're kind of, you're washing up, you're looking around, you're like, oh, that tile looks, that grout's missing there. What's going on there? And if it's been 20 years since that shower's been replaced, I mean, the chances are she's done.
There's other things growing there.
Yeah.
You got me all off track now. Here we are talking showers with Justin. Apparently he does every day, folks. It's good to know. He's nice and clean for us.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Hey, I'm a double. I'm a double a day.
There it is.
Yeah. We get pretty dirty.
Yeah, I'm sure you guys do. I think it's interesting with the mold, because I think so many people don't realize, like you said, the simple spots to check, like to go back and check under the sink, behind the washer and dryer, and all those little things. And if you catch it early enough, then it's not going to be a big problem, and you can keep that area cleaned up. So I think that's probably more your message today too, unless you got something that's a big spot. Oh, I know what it was. What I had read and I wanted to talk to you about was signs and symptoms, because a lot of people mistake allergies for molds. It's the same symptoms, folks. Like, make sure, if everything's great when you're outside and all of a sudden you've got all these itchy eyes and runny nose constantly in your house, it could be that it's other factors like molds. So it's just something else to be aware of. And I didn't realize that, but that, to me, that.
Well, no, and that's a great point. I mean, I get on the home tangent, but I mean, the environmental thing is that's exactly it. I mean, the same things that are the same spores that are getting pushed out by all these plants. Those same things can exist inside your house, and it doesn't necessarily have to be mold. I mean, there's 100 different allergens that can be pushed around in your furnace and so on and so forth. But when it comes to mold, I mean, mold can create those exact same outdoor symptoms, because it is a little plant, right? It's doing the same deal. So, I mean, that's a great point, is that, yeah, if you notice it's like this never ending cold, well, then, maybe it's the house.
Yeah, it could be something else.
All
right. I know you got to get to work. Thanks for doing this today. But next show, I want to talk about, we touched on it earlier. And again, this will be our last one hopefully on water, folks, because we've been swimming in this for a while. But I want to talk to you next week about fixing outside cracks, concrete where waters come through with, rock facing and all that on houses, because I didn't realize how big of a problem that can be and how quickly that water can just pull those off. You know what I mean? So I want to talk to you a little bit about how you can repair those and what your protocol is. And like you said earlier in our last show, there's a lot of stuff folks can do themselves, isn't there? Especially when it comes to the molds, right?
Oh yeah. No, well, mold and all these little things that are, they're very, very small, homeowner, easily done by any homeowner. I don't care who you are, but all these checks can be made. Do your own investigation. Why are you going to, hey, we're out there to make money too as well, but why pay somebody to check it out? Do it, if you've got the time, have a look around yourself and do a little bit of, don't do a lot of Googling, just do enough Googling to give you the information, because some of the Googling is send you down the wrong path. Right. But, a lot of these things can be diagnosed, and then you've already got this pocket and this notebook of information, so that when you do make the phone call, whether it's to a company like us as a renovation company or a environmental company, at least you're spitting out some information that they can use, rather than them spend their 2 hours to tell you what you could have already known, and then they're billing you for that. Right?
All right, Justin from Elevation Homes, it's time for you to get to work. Thanks for your time today. Follow him on Instagram, folks. He's a big Instagram guy. Check it out. You can see our videos there as well. And take care, bud. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks very much, Dave.